Hello, hello, everybody. Bienvenidos. Hello. We are so excited to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month with you all. My name is Colleen Baker. I am a producer here at the Houston Chronicle, and I already see quite a few people joining in. And just to get us all started, right away, we want to know what part of Houston you are tuning in from. Are you like me and Fernando here in the Galleria area? Are you in the Heights? Are you in Katie Suela? Where are you? We want to know. Let us know. And also, I see Willowbrook is already here. Galleria is here. People are chiming in. In the meantime, go ahead and drop your comments and questions for our fantastic panelists. Obviously, Fernando will get into all of this, but we have Dr. Murillo, we have Dr. Payan, we have Austin, we have Gabriela, everyone from arts, culture, politics, business, education, you name it. So any specific questions, drop them in the chat. We will try to get to as many as we can. I see Hola from San Miguel. Oh, wow. We have San Miguel de Allende in the house. Wow. Okay. I love that we are automatically getting people outside of Houston. I also see Pearland and Bel Air. So you all, obviously, as panelists know, we have Latinos in the house, I'm sure. So automatically, just to kind of give you all some minutes while you start dropping your questions for our panelists in the chat. We want you all to know that there is a little survey after this. We will absolutely share the questions for the panelists as well, and give them a chance to kind of see, and we'll pass the story ideas or your commentary to our reporters, to Fernando, of course, who can be editing these types of topics every day, and it'll just have awesome opportunity to share and continue the conversation. So, all right, I see Kingwood is here, people from Second Ward and Dripping Springs out toward Austin. Wow, okay. I think that settles it for me. Fernando, I will let you take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for obviously participating. And thank you everybody for tuning in to this great event we're having here. I wanted to start off by first going around to our panelists and having them introduce themselves and providing a little bit of background in terms of who they are. And yeah, I guess, Austin, we can start with you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Austin Davis Ruiz, he, him. I am the current president of the Houston LGBTQ plus political caucus, the South's oldest LGBTQ plus civil rights organization. I'm also one of the youngest presidents in the organization's history, as well as the first male Latino to be president of the organization. Outside of that, I have previously worked at the Montrose Center and have done a lot of advocacy within the LGBTQ plus community, and currently work as one of the two community engagement managers for Harris County Precinct 4, the Office of Commissioner Leslie Briones.
Wonderful. Thank you, Austin. Dr. Murillo, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you for this opportunity to the Houston Chronicle. My name is Dr. Laura Murillo, President and CEO of the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I'm also the founding CEO of our Emerging Leaders Institute, and I'm a #1 international bestselling author in the US, Canada, and Australia for my book, Lead in Life. Proud Houstonian, born and raised in Houston, Texas, raised in Houston's East End area, and absolutely thrilled to be in this conversation.
Thank you so much. Gabriela?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm Gabriela Magana. I'm originally from Mexico. I've been living here in Houston for the past 15 years. I'm an artist and curator, cultural worker. I am the Deputy Director of Operations and Programs with ALMA, which is the organization advocating for a Latino museum in Houston, the first of its kind. I'm also working with the BIPOC Arts Network and Fund, coordinating the Artist Awards, and a founding member of the Latin American Women in the Arts Houston, LAWA.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Dr. Payan.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you for the invitation to all of you. My name is Tony Payan. I'm director of the Center for the U.S. and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, and a philosopher and political scientist by training. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all again. And again, I'm Fernando Alfonso, one of the managing editors here at the Houston Chronicle. I come by way of Atlanta. I was last there for 5 years working for National Public Radio. But I'm originally from New York, but did live in Texas 6 years ago. So it's wonderful to be back in Texas. When I moved here, a couple months ago, I got an appropriate Houston welcome with Hurricane Beryl. So it is nice that since then things have calmed down in Houston in regards to the weather. So I want to kick us off in I think, a very appropriate place given where we are as a country and what we're facing in November. We sit here just a few weeks from a historic election, as we all know. Swing states like Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona, the Latino vote is considered crucial for both presidential candidates. As you all know, the differences between first and second generation Latinos versus second and third generation are pretty vast, complex, and often misunderstood by politicians at a national, state, and local level. These differences play out every day in Texas, as you all are well aware. As election day draws near, and this is a question really for all of you, what advice do you have for Texans running for public office who are eager to earn that coveted Latino vote?
Well, I'll go ahead and get started by saying that the Latino vote is certainly very different. We see many differences between first, second, third generation, whether someone was born here, homes that have different generations within the household. And so for those running for political office, certainly they must do their homework. There's a lot more at the surface and beneath the surface as it relates to Latinos. A vote must be earned, and it must be certainly one that is strategy driven, with a full understanding that there is no one Hispanic that is the same, and that we come from Venezuela, we were born here, we are Mexican, we're from El Salvador and Colombia, all with many unique experiences. And the demographics also play heavily into this strategy as well. So a very important segment of the demographic, and one that, again, merits and deserves attention, respect, and definitely timely consideration in courting young and older Latinos in Texas.
Yes,
Thank you.
I agree with you, Dr. Murillo. Actually, when I think of Latinos, and what I think that people running for office need to understand is that, like you said, Latinos are not a monolith. Take, for example, language. There's over 20 languages from Latin America being spoken in the US. So in Spanish, obviously being the larger, the vast majority, but there's other indigenous languages, Nahuatl, Quechua, etc., Caribbean languages. So it's important to do the homework, do the due diligence, and understand Latinos being heard. We need to be heard, engage genuinely with the Latino community as well. From the cultural side, I would say that arts, it's a very good way to connect with people, because despite the differences, art can be the vehicle to a level playing field where you can talk about issues that are conflicting many times within the same families. And the third thing that I would add to that is also investment. I think that Latinos, we need the investment from people in power, right? So it's important to recognize the initiatives that we have been spearheading all this time. So it's important to have the recognition when it comes to funding as well.
Yeah, just to echo that comment, Gabriela, definitely would agree that, Latinos are not a monolith. There are so many vast differences, not just in language, not just in customs, traditions, but also, just cultural differences, right? Between different countries. Even just looking at Harris County, there are so many differences between, populations, especially depending on what neighborhood you live in. So that's the first thing I would just echo. But the second thing, the really most important thing, we have to look at the rhetoric that has been used to talk about Latinos as of late, right? A lot of the rhetoric has been that Latinos are migrants that are not wanted in this country, right? That are trying to take jobs, that are trying to cause some type of harm, right? We've seen one political party really demonize and dehumanize, right, Latinos simply for trying to get asylum in this country. And so I think one of the really important things that we have to do is we have to look at both political parties and see who is really fighting for all Latinos, who is really going to make sure that Latinos are going to be able to prosper. And the last thing I would also say, just to kind of play off of that point, is really looking at what issues are of importance, right? Because issues that are important to Latinos here in Harris County are going to be different than issues of importance to Latinos that maybe live in the Rio Grande Valley. right, that maybe live in Dallas or even outside of the state of Texas, right? And so it's really important for candidates not just to look at Latinos and say, oh, this is like an important demographic. There are so many different issues, or so many nuances, so many things that really have to be taken into consideration beyond just the cultural differences, that are really going to be important in terms of actually gaining the demographic and actually getting their vote with confidence.
Austin, I would just add one thing that I find that candidates tend to do is patronize sometimes Latinos by a quick catchphrase, speaking a few words in Spanish at the beginning. And sometimes it's well-intentioned, but it can come across as patronizing. And I think there's still a lot of educating to be done about Latinos, about the fact that we, in fact, are CEOs, we're PhD, we're professors, we're community leaders, that in fact, they need to be able to have a voice that speaks to all of us, that treats us with respect, that our vote must too be earned. And I like the point that was made earlier about the investing in our community, and that as voters, we are doing our homework on these candidates to make sure they didn't just show up 3 months ago, but that they have been with us, and more importantly, that they will be for us moving forward.
I just want to point out a couple of things. Number one is from the perspective of the political parties, I think the Republicans are doing what they need to do, right? Which is divide the Hispanic vote. An appeal to the Hispanic vote is on two levels, I think. One is the conservative values of the Hispanic community, the presumed or alleged conservative values of the Hispanic community, and then appeal to the economic interests of the Hispanic community through the idea that in the case of Texas, the Republican administration is pursuing pro-growth policies, which end in increased employment, and I think that the Hispanics can then participate in that prosperity. The Democrats, I think, are failing at one thing. The numbers still say that 60 to 65% of all Hispanics vote Democrat, and it's a matter of the numbers. If the Democrats don't really align themselves to understanding that the key to it is what California did in 1994 to 1996, which is affiliate 1 to 2 million new voters, and the Hispanics are right there. They just vote in lower numbers. The statistics clearly show that Hispanics punch below their weight, African Americans at about their weight, and the European descendant population punches above its weight. If we get the Hispanics to vote at that same level, if they punch at their weight, I think the state's political landscape will look very, very different. So I think both the political parties have to do their homework, and we as citizens, I think, have to understand that the political parties are going to do what they're going to do. They're going to do their homework. They're going to apply a message, and they're going to try to maximize the benefits from their message. But at the end of the day, it's up to us and to the political parties to hit the right strategy, I think, to change Texas for the better.
One of the things that the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has done is that with our partners at Odyssey and over 6 of the radio stations here in the greater Houston region, with an audience reach of over 3 million, we have recorded public service announcements, once again, promoting educational knowledge and awareness about voting, when to vote, where to vote, etc. We must all do our part at the grassroots level, in the corporate arenas, at all of our events, etc., is that we are actively promoting engagement and voter participation. We have enough people registered to make a significant impact on the upcoming elections. Whether or not we exercise that right will be seen.
One of the things that I think is, sorry.
Please go ahead. We were talking about this before we started, Austin. Go ahead.
One of the things I think is really interesting that you kind of made me think of, Dr. Murillo, is, how the landscape has changed in terms of how people reach voters in this day and age, right? 10 years ago, we didn't really lean so much onto social media to proliferate messages, right? We didn't really have the kind of viralness of TikTok. We didn't really have that kind of instant connection to people halfway across the world, right? Now, everything is so instantaneous. People really look to find information in new ways. They don't necessarily watch news on television anymore. They don't necessarily read, periodicals or consume news in the same way. Most of Gen Z and Gen Alpha are getting their news from TikTok, right? And so I think one of the things that's going to be important in terms of political parties moving forward and connecting with voters, specifically with Latino constituencies, is going to be to find those trusted sources that they can connect with, right? Because it's one thing to hear a message from a political candidate, right? It's another thing to hear that from somebody that you follow, whose content you consume on a daily basis, right? Who you look to for trusted information. And so I think one of the really important things moving forward as we continue in kind of this age of social media is going to be with candidates really looking at those kind of trusted community voices, making those genuine connections and using them to kind of push out their message, right? That's going to be especially crucial, I think, in future elections.
Mhm.
And also one thing that I would like to add is that we have touched on generational differences and ways that people are trying to reach constituents, but I want to add the fact that also people are getting more involved, right? Younger generations are getting more involved. Me being in the cultural sector, I see how artists, and this is obviously not new, but artists are engaged in civic issues. And so we have seen it decade after decade, how through the arts, people have mobilized people to go and vote. So that is one thing that I think that shouldn't be passed as or diminished, because I think that the power that culture and arts hold to mobilize community is greater than many times is thought of.
Thank you all. And I want to drill down a little bit more into what you all touched upon here, how the Latino vote is not a monolith. And I think that when you even drill down further into the interpersonal level, what you also find is that any given Latino voter is multifaceted and actually very complex. And I will tell you, I sit here with my phone next to me, and on a daily basis, I get messages, and as a group message I have with my tios, my uncles, my aunts, around how one of my uncles is a diehard Trump supporter, voted for him in 2016, will vote for the man again. And a lot of my tias and aunts, they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. And it is a very lively group message with memes and news articles. And it gets pretty heated sometimes, as I'm sure many of you all can appreciate. I guess my question is, my family, when this happens, there's all these differences, but over cervezas and maduros and empanadas, when we all gather together, it's all love and family, and we can, accept each other for, the beliefs and the differences we all have. When it comes to our elected officials, how important is it for them to understand this dynamic in Hispanic culture, not only ahead of the election, but after the election?
Well,
I think
if I may, look, those of us who have family in Mexico and then family in the United States who've been on both sides of the border for 100 years, the very first Payans came to the United States during the Mexican Revolution, talking about 110 years ago, right? When they left Mexico and they kind of began to migrate towards New Mexico and California and other places. And I can tell you, at the end of the day, I think family really matters. And I think you have to keep it in perspective. We're going to have disagreements. I also got relatives who are quite conservative, and some of them are actually very liberal. But at the end of the day, I think what matters is really that we have to come back together, and that at the end of the day, having a civil discourse, and I think having a better country that serves all of our interests is much better than anything that's going to happen. Of course, there's always going to be those relationships you're going to break away from because they're just kind of toxic. They turn toxic, and you have to walk away from them for at least a while and let it rest, kind of let it simmer. But at the end of the day, I think there has to be a reconciliation. We cannot allow politicians to divide, especially our families. I think that'd be my perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Payan, Gabriela, Dr. Murillo, Austin.
that is so real, the fact that there's many different points of view within one family. And I think that it has many reasons, right? We have been talking about the generational differences and cultural differences. It's undeniable that older generations have lived through civic movements themselves, while younger generations are looking at all of these issues from a different perspective. So understanding those differences, I think that the way that Latinos, we have been doing it for generations is through food, through music. Like you said, when it's a party, all of those differences go out the window, because at the end, it's the connection that culture brings to the table. Share a conversation, share a moment with your family member through food, through a drink, or whatever it is. It's part of what I was saying in the beginning, that I think that culture, arts and culture, food, music, all of that, it brings us together. So understanding that, I think that shouldn't be missed, because right now we are at a point where we need to come together and unite, organize.
You know, I think in 2016, I definitely could see that there was room for kind of differences across the political spectrum. You know, I think back then we didn't necessarily know who Trump was as an elected official, right? And so people were very enticed into what he could have brought to the country, right? And, you know, he was elected as president, and he was not ultimately reelected in 2020, because in that first presidency, that first term, hopefully the only one, we saw exactly the damage he could do to this country. And so I think fast forwarding to this year, into this election, I don't necessarily see that there is opportunity to be able to break bread with people who support Trump, because of the way that he has tried to weaponize the very foundings of this country against the country itself, right? There is serious damage that could be done should he ever get to the White House again. Just look at Project 2025, right? That is a dismantling of the country, a dismantling of the principles, a dismantling of the values that we hold dear. And so I don't necessarily agree that there is a need for elected officials to understand this kind of difference across the spectrum, because for me personally, there is no acceptance of that political reality. When you are voting for somebody who wants to dehumanize our cultures, dehumanize us as people, and to take away our fundamental ability to vote in this country and refuse to accept the results of a duly certified election, there is no opportunity for acceptance for me in that.
I think one of the takeaways, if there's an upside to this division, would be that amongst Latinos, there seems to be much more conversation around elections. Whether they're Republican, Independents, or Democrats, we're talking more about them, maybe because there's so much disruption. The hope is that we can come back to a level playing field of respect and the ability to agree to disagree. We have lost that. The hope is that we can once again be a strong country where we can disagree and still be proud that we are the most diverse country in the world, that we can work together, that we can move forward, and that we can also have economic prosperity. Because at the end of the day, so much that affects or impacts or negatively impacts this country can in fact be fixed, can be helped, can be adjusted if we are economically viable, that all of us have the opportunity to thrive in this country.
Thank you all for that perspective. I want to switch away from a historic election to election to a historic election in Mexico. You know, Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, climate scientist, has made history as the first woman president in Mexico's history. Given the longstanding agreements with Houston, these business agreements with Houston, what would you all like to see more of when it comes to trade between the city and Mexico under this new administration?
I'd like to take that question. I recently returned from Mexico City and the inaugural events of last week as part of the Texas Association of Business. My thanks to President and CEO Glenn Hammer and many folks from across the globe, particularly focused on the relationship between the US, Canada, and Mexico. Specifically, we must protect USMCA, as there's going to be a revision or a revisit in 2026, and what that means, especially to the city of Houston and the United States. In order for us to thrive and continue to do well, we must have a strong trading relationship with our number one partner, which is Mexico. And so being there to witness this as a woman, as the mother of two daughters, to witness this historic moment was breathtaking, especially looking at over 1 million people at the Zócalo witnessing this, people in tears with hope and aspirations. Our hope is that we are able to continue to work closely with our neighbors and protect, as mentioned, the trading relationship that is so vitally important to our economy and jobs. And so being present was certainly breathtaking, a historic moment, and it gives us hope that women too can absolutely hold high offices and high levels of responsibilities, whether it's in their household or in the White House, that we will continue to see women thrive to the highest positions. And Mexico has done that. What happens from this point on is yet to be determined.
I wanna address that issue because it's one of the central issues that we deal with at the Mexico Center. I'm not as optimistic. I'm not as optimistic about Ms. Sheinbaum. I think that nothing in what she has said is promising. I think that she wants to continue a project that has been disastrous to Mexico. It has left a security situation that is simply unbearable. We just saw this week the decapitation of the mayor of Chilpancingo, and she showed no empathy whatsoever towards that family in that situation. And that's just one instance of many. She has certainly supported the recarbonization of Mexico's economy, going back on that issue. And she is supporting the dismantling of Mexico's judicial branch, which is one of the most anti-democratic moves that a country can make and has made. Witness Venezuela and Bolivia and a few other countries. And I think she has supported a political project that looks quite a bit like the restoration of the authoritarian system of the 20th century. And she also inherits an economy that I think is going backwards and continues to support companies like Pemex, which are essentially breaking the back of Mexico's fiscal system. So to me, it doesn't really matter who is at the top. I think her promise to continue this failed project in Mexico is going to be very costly, both to Mexico and to Texas. And it's only going to feed to the already mounting kind of xenophobic isolationist discourse in the United States. We have already seen that many in the United States are advocating for the death of the USMCA. Somebody at an event at the Baker Institute mentioned that the USMCA is not guaranteed to be ratified in 2026, particularly because it doesn't really expire right there and then. They can do it in 27, in 28, and 29, all the way up to 36, which is when it really is supposed to expire, if not ratified over those years. So to me, we're entering really troubled waters. It's going to be a very rocky period, and it really doesn't matter who's at the helmet. The decisions that our politicians are making are really, really creating the conditions for a perfect storm where they are risking really the idea of North America that is something that had been built over many, many years. So I really am not that optimistic. I think the project in Mexico does not deserve the benefit of the doubt. We gave it to Mr. López Obrador 6 years ago, and look where we are today, where Mexico is today, and the kind of danger that we are today. We have allowed the binational relationship to be captured by one issue, immigration and the border political circus that is going on. I think the governor is to be faulted here in Texas as well. So I'm not as optimistic. We have to continue to point out the things that are going wrong and be sure that we are not all starry-eyed and clearly thinking that somehow this is going to make a difference. We have to watch what our politicians do, not what they say. Thank you.
I think one of the things that was mentioned during the 100 points at the address she presented at the Zócalo was disappointing in the fact that of the 100 points, from where I was standing, I only heard 2 related to business and the economy. The vast majority were social programs, which if you talk to everyday people, not the politicians, but your Uber drivers, the waiters, etc., they're concerned that there is no money to fund these programs. And that in fact, it's perpetuating this idea of taking care of those who have the least, but at the same time, making sure that they don't come out of poverty. And so there are some very, very delicate things occurring, which I believe should absolutely trigger us here in the US and our elected officials to do everything they can to protect, especially USMCA as best as we can, given the continuation of what many believe is the past 6 years, right? And so there's a lot for us to watch here. And I think it was said very well. It's what they do, not what they say.
Well, thank you to you both. My last question, which please it can be answered by any of you and hopefully all of you, is looking at the arts industry. So as you all know, the Houston arts industry supports thousands of jobs, generates millions of dollars for the metro area. You know, funding for the conservation and management of public art remains fraught, given the city's budgetary gap of $160 million, something we've reported on here in this newsroom. Even with these, you know, fraught limited resources, what is something Houston cannot compromise on when it comes to the arts in 2025?
I think
Well, as
that there,
sorry, go ahead, Gabriela.
yes, thank you. I think that there are three key areas that shouldn't be missed. One is arts education. We know that we need arts education not only in schools, but also in the community, supporting programs led by artists that are getting introduced in the communities beyond the school programs. That is one. The other thing, I think that it would be civic art projects. We have all seen the reports from the city when it comes to equity, and we have seen the gaps. So we know, and we have seen the improvement that the city has been made in that regard. So I think that continue to support the civic art projects is imperative. But also the third aspect that I would say is support for organizations. I think that organizations have that it's vital to assure and reassure that they are going to continue do the essential work that they are doing, because once the organizations have the funding that they need, then they can employ people and provide opportunities for artists and actually arts and culture to the community, which improves the lives of all the constituents.
I think you're absolutely right. I would like to add that in order for the arts, education, and so many other programming that is important and vital to our state and country, we must further engage the corporate sector. They must be part of the solution. Private funding is imperative and needed. There's absolutely no way that a city, the state, or the country can fund the arts and so many other educational needs. And so we must work with our corporate CEOs, and that's what the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has been doing here locally, at the state level, and nationally. Present an agenda that supports all of the things that are going to be needed for our country to do well. And as I like to say, as Hispanics go, so goes Houston. And so let us continue to reach out and find private-public opportunities.
Yeah, I would just echo the sentiments about, funding arts organizations throughout the city. I know that with the most recent budget, City Council voted to, reduce funding to the Houston Arts Alliance from 25 million to 15 million, right? The Houston Arts Alliance, by and large, uses that money that they are granted by City Council to then sub-grant out to other organizations. I know this because I used to work at one of those organizations that was a recipient of HAA funding. And so definitely I would say, operational general funding for arts organizations is one of the things that absolutely needs to stay, because that is really how organizations are able to stay afloat. There are tons of grant opportunities for new programs. There's opportunities for new partnerships, right? To your point, Dr. Murillo, we would often apply to private funding from corporations through kind of their corporate giving side, right? So there's tons of money available for programs, services. What isn't really readily available is that money for operating support, which is how people get paid, right? That's how you pay for rent. That's how you keep the lights on for these organizations. And a lot of these organizations really do depend on that money coming from HAA. Again, I would also just say that there definitely needs to be, more funding support for arts education. That was one of the main programs that we provided at the organization that I worked for, Young Audiences of Houston. And a lot of these kids that are in these programs are low income, low socioeconomic. Most of them are minority, right? And we know the power of the arts. The arts has such potential to be able to be the equalizer for education. And a lot of these kids have never had an opportunity to be in a dance class, to be in an arts class, right? To be, in a music class. And they're the ones that really need it, right? And so I would say that we really do need to look at making sure that arts education funding is not only there, but also more equitable, because it really is needed in these places where there are arts deserts, where students don't have any opportunity at their schools to engage. And then lastly, I would just say, I think that since Houston's art industry is a $1 billion industry, it really does get overlooked so much by people. They say, oh, it's the arts. It is what it is. It's kind of this extra thing over here. It's a luxury, right? But it really does create so much commerce for a local economy here. And people really do depend on, the money that it supplies for them for their jobs, right? And so I think that whenever we are looking at budget cuts for the city of Houston, arts is often the first thing that gets cut. And I really would advocate that maybe we look a little bit deeper and see how we can ensure that such a vital resource continues to be funded throughout the city.
As a public policy specialist, in the past, I would have said that every single progress or improvement in any city, any community, really comes through public policy. And now, over time, I think I've gotten a little wiser and thought that maybe the arts really matter and that they do change lives. I'll tell you two stories very briefly, among the lessons that I've learned. The first is this summer, I was invited to visit Luxembourg, and the city dedicates 10% of its budget to the arts. This is unheard of here because we also rely heavily on the private sector when it really should be part of the public spending of a city. It should be part of the city budget to stimulate the arts, because the arts really bring out the more sensible, the more interesting parts of a human being, and they really build the spirit. They really build the soul of a person. So I think we need to integrate the arts more, not just as an afterthought or a philanthropic activity. We need to really build it into our system, into our budget. And the second story, I'll tell you, recently through a friend, I became involved in the Houston Ballet a little bit, just sort of tangentially. And I've been in touch with some of the folks that work at the Houston Ballet. Occasionally we go out and we have dinner, and we just began a new organization called Talento Pro Mexico. This particular group brings these kids from Mexico, various ballet academies throughout Mexico. And I was introduced to them in a meeting a year ago in October in Cordoba, Veracruz, where they had a Grand Prix, and all these academies from throughout Mexico, went to this event in Cordoba, a place that I would never have visited otherwise. And it was an interesting experience because I met this little boy. It was about a 11, 12-year-old boy, great dancer, coming from a hut with dirt floors and living in a hut with made with corrugated, kind of a metal hut with this just a poor family and a kind of a father who was a little bit of an alcoholic and things like that. And they asked me for some help to get this kid over here, to get him to an academy. And more recently, at that point, many of the great guys from London and San Francisco and New York and Toronto and Madrid and Berlin come down and recruit these talents. They're kind of scouting talents. This kid ended up being recruited by Luca Masala and taken to the Grace Kelly Academy in Monaco. I think this kid would have never had that opportunity if it hadn't been because of that community that is following these lives, detecting these particular talents. And I bet you that this will be a completely new life. A kid out of some poor colonia, out of Cordoba, Veracruz, now studying in Monaco at the Grace Kelly Academy. That really makes a difference. That really changes lives. And I think over time I've learned that these are the real success stories that make a big difference. And we ought to really integrate art as a way to redeem ourselves and to change our own lives and to gain a new perspective and hold all our community accountable to a new way of life, I think. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I mean, that covers my questions, and I know there are many in our chat here. So I wanted to bring some of them up with the remaining time we have. Some, they seem to be broadly for everybody here. So I will mention one here from Angel Romero. What Latino leadership opportunities are available, and for how many individuals annually? and where can we locate the links to these resources? So I don't know if any of you want to speak to any leadership opportunities in the Houston metro area.
Or I'll take that one. So the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce Foundation has established an Emerging Leaders Program. We have graduated over 350 individuals with less than 10 years of experience who have a college degree. And it does not matter if they're Hispanic. What matters is that they are already leaders and they are looking for more opportunities. So that is available. More information is on our website. That's one. And certainly we have many leadership programs in the city. Most of them, unfortunately, come with a hefty price tag, and some corporations are willing to pay so that their employees can participate in. But there are others there. So just do a quick Google search and you'll find something that I'm sure will fit your need. I think that it is critically important that each of us are always continuously looking for ways to find leadership opportunities, and that we are continually learning and making sure we're reaching our full potential. And Houston is a great place to do that.
I do just want to give a quick plug. Certainly, there's also Latinos for Education, right? They do have a leadership 9-month program that they're running. But I would just echo Dr. Murillo's sentiments. Certainly, Google search, see what opportunities there are. There are many, many, many in Houston. So please get involved. We definitely need more Latino leaders amongst the city. So please join us.
I would answer with a question back. I think, are we talking about leadership in the arts, leadership in civil society, NGOs, and things like that? Because Latinos are already in many different leadership positions in business, in companies, in many different places, perhaps still underrepresented. But Latino leadership is everywhere. So I'm guessing that what they really mean is NGOs and the way to make a difference in the kinds of leadership that require volunteering, for example. So that would be a little bit different. I think they probably have to dig around a little bit more. But I would say that Latinos in leadership are a well-established cross concept already. I mean, we're everywhere. Latino leaders are everywhere.
Yes, I was actually going to say that Dr. Murillo very well said it at the beginning of the session. Latinos, we are PhDs, we are we are everywhere. So the opportunities are there. And now what I would like to add on everything that has been said so far is the New Leaders Council, which is a national organization, but there's a Houston chapter. And through that organization, I just did their program, I believe, earlier this year. Yes, it was this year. So it connects you with different leaders in different sectors. It doesn't have to be nonprofit. It could be many different sectors, and it's a good organization to connect to apply and do their program and everything, because it truly gives you an opportunity to see civic issues through different perspectives.
Yes.
Thank you all for that. This is a question here from Kim Mabry. This was asked at about the time when we were discussing elections, the election coming up. How important is religion to the younger generations of the Hispanic community? Are they remaining Catholic, or do you see growth in other religious traditions, or are they growing in the category of nuns like many other younger people?
So recently we held our data summit at the Federal Reserve, and we were fortunate enough to work with the University of Houston, Hobby School for Public Policy, and others. And the data at the time of our particular event indicated that especially young people have not maintained those ties that perhaps their parents or grandparents had and held so closely to. We have seen a shift, especially post-COVID, in terms of established religion, organizational religion. So there is absolutely, from the data that we have been able to gather, a very different type of young person under 30 and their religious beliefs, or potentially not holding religious beliefs, especially as it relates to organized religion. But I'll leave folks on the panel to also jump in.
Yeah, I think I just want to say something about that. It doesn't surprise me. I think 50%, 51% of Americans today are unaffiliated to any religion, really. Even if we're kind of cultural Catholics, and my case of my family, we're just cultural Catholics. We go to baptisms, weddings, and funerals and things like that, but that's the extent of our engagement really with the church. But it's lost in Americans and it's lost in Hispanics. And I think it shouldn't surprise us that the younger generations, those who are born in the United States and grow up in the United States, begin to lose those connections. The general population is also losing them. I mean, Hispanics, at the end of the day, when you get to the second, third, fourth generation, you realize that they begin to acquire this kind of American outlook in income, in language use, in culture, and even bad things too, obesity and other vices and things like that. Hispanics have this ability to integrate fully into society. So I think that's just a trend of the general population. And when you get to the next generations of Hispanics, they just fully integrate and become fully American. And that's just part of it.
Experientially, while I did grow up Catholic, and I know my mother is on this call listening, I do not necessarily identify as Catholic anymore, for a lot of personal reasons, mostly having to do with my identity as a, gay man, right? But that's not to say that it doesn't still leave an impact on me, right? I do consider myself spiritual and I do believe in a higher power, right? I'm not necessarily sure if that's perfectly within the, Catholic religion. But I do think that is a trend that's just happening, kind of like Dr. Payan said, across the country with a lot of younger folks. They're not necessarily identifying with any kind of religion, but, that doesn't necessarily mean that they still don't hold any kind of spiritual or beliefs in a higher power.
In the similar vein, a question here from Gina De Leon was, what advice do you have for no sabo kids who want to still express their Latinidad?
Get antiquated with some type of, touch point. I kind of grew up as one of those kids, right? I grew up in a very Hispanic neighborhood. I do not speak Spanish fluently, right? Was never taught. But in high school, I had a friend from actually my CCE classes at church who invited me to, be in her quinceañera as her chambelán, right? And certainly growing up in quinceañeras and kind of being around that definitely got me to kind of be more connected. But then I actually joined a ballet folklorico group because the choreographer for the quinceañera also ran a ballet folklorico company. And that was really where I got my touch point to my identity. And now it is one of the, favorite parts about me that I have. I love being Latino, and it just takes that kind of one little touch point to really get you to be in touch with your culture. But the other thing I would say is you don't necessarily have to speak Spanish to really be in touch with your Latinidad, right? I am Latino, and you will never be able to change that. And that has nothing to do with my ability or inability to speak Spanish, right? That has to do with my heritage, my culture, my customs, things that I was raised around. And so, for those no sabo kids, I'm one of those kids. And don't let anybody tell you, who or you can be or can't be just because of what languages you may or may not speak.
I would add that it's important that we, as best as we can, if we choose to, maintain our native language. I am the youngest of 9. My parents came here as immigrants, and I am blessed to have been born and raised in this city. I have 2 daughters, and I asked 2 very specific things of them as young little girls, and that was that they please speak Spanish, learn how to write it, and embrace being Latinas, being Mexican Americans. And that is not easy to do in this country anymore. There are so many other factors that pull us away from this ability to share not only culture and heritage, but this very beautiful language. And having grown up as someone who spoke Spanish first and later learned English, Spanish is very dear to me. And my daughters grew up in the River Oaks area at St. John's School, where they were only one of their class, maybe 2, that were Hispanic. And to know that fast forward today, they're 22 and 25, and they are fully bilingual, and they embrace it, and they can write it, and they can speak it, I believe is a tribute to our ancestors, my parents who sacrificed so much. So as best as we can, let us embrace that. And if you don't speak it, that's okay too. But I'm glad to hear Austin feels 100% Latino and found other ways to demonstrate that and holds dear these customs, these traditions that make us unique, and that in fact, we too are Americans.
You know, I have to tell you, my experience is obviously on the border in El Paso. And I guess when I grew up, I was accustomed to listening to people, I guess, use English verbs conjugated in Spanish, right? And so it was sort of odd to mop and then mapear, or mapeo, mapeas, you know. So it was sort of, that was just part of the hybridity, I think, of the culture of the border. Those of us who grew up on the border, that was just kind of normal. But as I grew up, I think I came to appreciate ensuring that both my English and my Spanish were as perfect as they could be, and really cultivating them as separate languages. And I'm a little bit allergic to that hybridity, but I also understand that it's part of what happens. I mean, when you have a culture that's transplanted, when you have a Southwest that was transferred territorially and a lot of folks stayed, and then there were waves of migration. I also think that it was part of the history of the United States, the fact that many of our own ancestors, I guess, were discouraged from using Spanish in school and things like that, that had to make a difference and things like that. But today there is no excuse, I think. I mean, if somebody chooses to do, you know, this kind of hybrid language and use, and I've seen it, and I see it in El Paso all the time, because I go back home every other weekend, and I can tell you I see it. And I myself find that in conversations with friends, we switch back and forth, half a sentence in one language, half a sentence in the other. We do that all the time. But I think at the end of the day, we do it very consciously. And I think it's sort of interesting. It really opens your brain to a different perspective, a different way of thinking. Let me give you one instance. And there are some words that don't exist in the other language. You know, like apapachar, for example, which is a Spanish word. There's no equivalent in English. You have to think it in Spanish. It's sort of caressing and pampering the soul, you know, apapachar someone. So you have to understand it, that's what it means. And so there are some things, estrenar is another word that doesn't really exist, you know, to try something new, or, you know. So, and there are some words in English that are not going to have an equivalent in Spanish. So I think it really opens your mind if you really cultivate them and you really understand them both and you really use them both in the way they're supposed to use. Thank you.
I support that idea of cultural preservation, and I think that it's crucial, and not only through Spanish, but also recognizing that even before that, indigenous languages and cultures that were native to those lands, recognizing that and preserving those cultures and languages. So I think that that's one, but also recognizing that, especially with people who were born in the United States, going through that of not being taught the language that their parents spoke, whether it was Spanish or whichever other languages they spoke when they came here, and embracing that. I think that we all collectively need to move forward from this idea of what a Latino should be, or how to be Latino enough. I think that we should be beyond that. Whether we speak or look or skin or hair or whatever it is, I think that we need to look beyond that and allow people to self-identify as Latino if they feel Latino.
Thank you all very much. I know there are other questions we didn't get to in the chat, and my apologies for that, but please feel free to connect with me, Colleen, afterward about that. I wanted to, in the last 7 minutes, kind of come full circle with our panelists for a moment here, if you all will indulge me, with any advice or any last thoughts you have around the election, around people getting out to vote, and how crucial it will be for people to engage in our democracy in November. But I'd love to hear any last thoughts you all have on that.
Vote early, please. You have 2 weeks of early votes. They are even extending hours during some of the early vote days, and so they will be extended until 9 p.m. on Sundays. Please don't wait until election day, right? And if you don't know, if you do not have more than 2 hours outside of your normal work day to go vote, so before or after your work shift, right, your work day, your employer is legally required to give you paid time off to go vote. So please make sure you vote early, vote early, vote early.
Yes, and I would add that it's important not only that we go out and vote, but that each of us individually can gather our coworkers, our family, our friends, and make it an outing. Just make it something that is very important, especially for younger children, that they see you, the sister, the aunt, the mother, the father, doing this, that there are people who lost their lives so that we would have the opportunity to vote. Educate yourself. Let's stand up, let's go out and vote, and let's make sure that we educate ourselves about those decisions. And we're just so thankful to the Houston Chronicle for this opportunity to be with you on the Houston Chronicle Live with this conversation regarding voting, demographics, data, economy, and so much more. My thanks.
Yeah, my guess is that pay attention to the statistics. I think there's only one thing politicians care about: statistics. We are 40% of the population in Texas, and we're probably only a quarter of the votes cast, which means we're punching below our weight. We have to be equivalent to 40%. And that's when I think politicians will really begin to consider our interests as a community. If we punch right at our weight or even above, I think then we'll get the attention of politicians and we'll get the place that we, I think, deserve, that our numbers deserve, the statistics. Politicians are only going to pay attention to one thing. They're going to say many things, and I think they should not necessarily be believed, but they're certainly going to pay attention to who votes and how they vote. And I think it's really important that we begin to get those numbers to creep up to that 40% that we represent in the population in Texas.
Yes, I echo what everybody has said. Go vote. And also beyond this November election, we also need to keep informed. We need to look for information, verifiable information, and just keep being involved. Just getting involved and vote.
Thank you all so much. It's just truly great to have, Dr. Payan, Austin, Gabriela, Dr. Murillo, taking the time out of your busy schedules. Colleen, anything you'd like to add?
Absolutely. I echo that. Thank you to all of our panelists. We couldn't have gotten better candidates to speak on all of the areas that make Houston fantastic in the Latino space, as well as, every other type of minority and elsewhere that, shapes our wonderful city. And on that note, for the voting, we as a newsroom have already put out our Texas voter guide. It is being translated to Spanish, so it is a resource for everybody. If you have not looked at it already, go to HoustonChronicle.com. We will have it there. You can also follow us on social media. Definitely follow our panelists as well on social media as well for any other information about what they do, how they do it, and all of the fantastic events and updates from them. And again, thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone for joining us. We will have a brief survey going out to everyone. Please leave your other questions that we didn't get to, as well as any feedback for our panelists, and we will share it. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Hasta luego. Nos vemos. Muchas gracias. Bye-bye, everybody.